That's brilliant. That is a stroke of genius. Elliot has recently discovered systems instead. And Tom was like, well, who wouldn't? They're objectively more comfortable. Yeah, yeah. It's true. She's just wearing all patties. Yeah.
Totally accurate. That's so funny. What's going on?
Good morning, everyone.
It's so hot. I'm like at your eye level. This is a very
Good morning.
unusual feeling for me.
I am Bob Adler. I'm the Dean of the S.J. Quinney College of Law, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. I understand that I'm welcoming some of you to the law school, those of you who have attended the U, some of you to the University of Utah, some of you to the state of Utah, and I gather at least a couple of you to the United States. So welcome. The weather outside, for those of you not from Utah, is what we have 363 days a year. It rains once in the summer and it snows once in the winter, and otherwise it's like this all year round. Actually, we could use more snow relative to what we got this winter. So first, let me congratulate you. Obviously, you've been admitted, or you wouldn't be here. Our standards remain quite high, so it's an accomplishment of which you should be quite proud. There are many other applicants who would love to be sitting where you are right now. Having said that, our main goal today is to help you make a decision. And we understand that there are other good law schools out there, and many of you have choices. We, of course, hope that most or all of you will find that the right choice is to join us here. But we've spent a lot of time checking you out, and now the tide has turned. Now, fair is fair. It's your turn to check us out. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you want. We'll do our best to answer them. If you don't get all the information you want today, please remember that Dean Aguilar and me, members of the faculty, are all willing to answer your questions, take phone calls, take emails so that you can make a good and informed decision. So I want to begin, before I turn it over to the faculty panel, by giving you 3 reasons why I think you should consider us. 3 reasons that make us particularly attractive as a law school. One of them is size. We are among the smallest law schools in the country, one of the few smallest in the top 50 law schools in the country. We have consistently been in the top 10 for faculty to student ratio. And what that means is small classes, personal attention, and mentorship. We guarantee every first year student at least one small section in a major substantive class, 20 to 22 or 23 students, roughly, which allows us to teach you in ways that larger law schools simply can't. That continues throughout your law school career. We don't have big lecture classes of 100, 150, 175 students. Even our large classes in the upper division are maybe 40 or 50 students. There are a few that are bigger than that, and an awful lot of small classes. It also means that we can guarantee you that every one of you who wants an intensive experience with a faculty member on an external competition team, in a directed research team, can have that one-on-one or small group opportunity, learning opportunity, which is truly invaluable for your legal education. So size is one. Location is a second. As I joked about earlier, greatest snow on earth. Could have used a little bit more in the mountains this winter, but it's still wonderful recreational activities year-round in Utah if you like to get out into the mountains and do other things. But much more important educationally is our location in the capital city and where we're situated on campus. And we had some other sites further up in campus that we could have built. We intentionally chose to build our new building across from the track station so that we could take advantage of 2 benefits. One is that we're still an integral part of campus. We're still part of the university community. We haven't lost that. But unlike some law schools, you can be downtown either on light rail, on tracks, or driving, or on the bus in 10 or 15 minutes, which means that your access to the courts, to pro bono opportunities, to our clinical placements and internships, to employment opportunities is very, very convenient. And likewise, it gives the downtown bar, the practicing bar, ready access to us. And the Utah Bar has already indicated that they want to increase the amount of programming that they do in our new building, which means that continuing legal education programs, which students can go to for free, and other bar programs will become accessible to you. So I think location is really an important part of what we have to offer. But most important is quality. We have consistently been a top quartile law school throughout our history. We're a couple of years into our 2nd century of excellence. And I want to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the evidence I have for our quality. Rankings is, I know, what a lot of you focus on when you look at comparing schools, because it's the metric that's given to you. We're happy that we rose in the rankings to 42 this year. I'm not a great believer in every aspect of the US News methodology. What I am proud of is that our improvements this year were in the right areas, meaning the areas that help you. Improved bar passage rates, improved selectivity among students, and improved employment. So all things that are measures of how we can help you succeed, both in law school and after law school. I'm very proud of our 7th ranking in environmental law, for those of you interested in environmental and natural resources law, and we do it without being too expensive. And let's face it, law school is an expensive proposition. We have the 3rd lowest debt on graduation of the top 50 law schools in the country. So we provide quality at an extremely good value. We also provide quality in the area that matters most to you, The faculty is very, very proficient in scholarship, national reputations. Probably you care more about teaching. As part of the evidence of that, our faculty won 2 university-wide teaching awards this year. Professor Bill Richards won the University Distinguished Teaching Award, which will be offered at graduation. This is the highest teaching honor at the University of Utah. Professor Michael Teeter won the Early Career Teaching Award. That cuts across the faculty as a whole, our commitment to good teaching. I also want to comment a little bit about this national debate about teaching theory and doctrine versus teaching you how to practice law. And my personal view is that it's a silly debate because they're all tied together. And my personal teaching philosophy is that in every class I teach legal theory, I teach the doctrine and substance, I teach legal ethics, I teach practice skills, and I talk about how they all fit together. And I think many of my colleagues share that view. You'll hear from some of them in the future, but we do a good job of all of those. We think all of those are important. Let me give you just a few pieces of evidence of that. National Jurist Magazine last year ranked us second in the country after Yale for clinical placements per student, for our clinical programs, where you've got opportunities all throughout our community, nationally and internationally. 4 years running, we've been in the top 20 schools in the country for practical training without sacrificing good, solid, doctrinal legal education. And here's my favorite, how you have performed, or how those who came before you have performed. In the last 3 years, our students or student teams have won 11 national awards. And for a law school of our size, that's truly remarkable. So in 2013, our national moot court team won the best brief in the country, best brief of any school in the country. Next year, 2014, second best brief, a half point off the top. In 2013, one of our students won the National Law Review's Student Writing Award. Professor and Dean Lincoln Davies coaches our environmental law moot court team. In 2014, they won the best brief in the country, and they also finished in the top 3 teams overall. In 2015, this year, they won one of the best brief awards for one of the parties in the country. This year, our bankruptcy negotiation team won the national championship. So although our basketball team got knocked out of the tournament on Friday night, we're national champions in bankruptcy negotiation, which is way more important, right? And they also wrote the best paper in that competition. Our energy law moot court team won the best brief in the country this year, and our constitutional law moot court teams won the best brief in the country and a runner-up award. So the number of student awards that we have been accumulating is remarkable. Clearly, we're doing something incredibly right in teaching our students how to write, how to think, how to analyze, how to compete with some of the best schools in the country. It will get even better, of course, in the new building. I'm not going to talk a lot about the building because I know we've offered you tours. If you think the building is phenomenal, please tweet it out, put it on Facebook, put it out on social media, so those of you who can't be here today and who aren't watching on the cameras can learn how remarkable this building is. It will be the most sustainable law school building in the country, second LEED Platinum design in the country. Our architects have won awards for universal accessibility for people with all sorts of disabilities, whether it's mobility or sight or hearing or learning disorders, more and better teaching and learning spaces in the building, research and learning modules for our law journals, our clinics, our pro bono initiatives, the kinds of small group learning spaces that we haven't had in the past, and frankly, a lot more living space for you. Very luxurious, varied study spaces for you in the building, a separate student lounge with exercise equipment and showers and a bike storage room so that you can make this your home. Much better food services, dining services on this part of campus. And one thing I want to assure you is that it won't cost you anything more. And I know there have been, rumors about big new building. Is it going to increase your costs due to a building fee? Our capital campaign has proceeded well enough that any increase in student cost has been deferred at a minimum to 2021, long after you graduate from law school. We hope to eliminate it entirely, but I want to assure you that it's not going to cost you more money. So we are looking forward to moving into the new building next year. We hope as many of you as possible will join us. And now I want to turn it over to our faculty panel. I am going to briefly introduce each of our panelists, and then I'm going to ask each of them to say a bit more about themselves, what their teaching interests are, what their scholarly interests are. Some of them will talk a little bit about our curriculum, and then we will open it up for questions. So to my immediate left is Professor and Associate Dean Lincoln Davies, who teaches civil procedure, energy law, environmental law, administrative law. He's also currently serving as Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, for which I'm personally most grateful. This year, he was named by President Pershing as one of the presidential scholars, one of 4, I think it was, presidential scholars in the university for his scholarship in energy law and other areas. To his left is Professor Emily Chang, who teaches constitutional law and civil rights and anti-discrimination law, along with a clinical practicum course that I think she'll talk about. Last year, she was the university's Community Engaged Scholar of the Year for her work in the community. This year, her public policy practicum clinic won a Moving It Forward Social Justice Award from the Social Work School for their work on the Schools to Prisons pipeline, which she might spend a little bit of time talking about. She writes in various areas of non-discrimination law, and she also speaks Mandarin. So if any of you speak Chinese and want to chat with her in Chinese, you can do that. To her left is Professor Carissa Hessick, who is also our incoming Associate Dean for Faculty and Research Support. She teaches criminal law, criminal procedure, professional responsibility, very prolific and a scholar with a growing national reputation in criminal law, her work on sentencing, her work on criminal laws applied to child pornography and other issues. And finally, last but not least, Professor Cliff Roski, who also teaches constitutional law and family law and criminal law. He is a 2-time winner of a national award called the Duke Minier Award, which rewards the best legal scholarship in the country on issues involving sexual orientation. He's also on the board and has been board chair of Equality Utah. If you recognize his name from the newspaper, he was very, very instrumental in the anti-discrimination bill that just passed the Utah legislature. So with that, I will turn it over to Dean Davies.
Hi, everyone. So I think I stand out in a few different ways, but maybe, height. Professor Chang noted that this is the first time she's ever been eye level with me. I'm bald, which my kids remind me of repeatedly. My daughter calls this my spikes, and she says I need to shave them off because she doesn't like my spikes. But I think most of all because I'm a native Utahn. I don't think any of you are, right? And so the funny thing is I'm a native Utahn. I was born in Utah. I was raised in Utah. I've never asked my parents the question which my good friend from law school said only makes you a true Virginian if you have the trifecta. You have to be born in Virginia, raised in Virginia, and also conceived in Virginia. I've never asked my parents that. But I also, I left the state. My mother said when I went to college that I ran away. And I was thinking about this morning, I never even really considered coming to the University of Utah Law School as a student. And now that I've been here, this is my 8th year here, I think that was really fallacious. I should have at least thought about it, because we really are an amazing institution. But what I can say is, having left the state for undergrad and for law school, and then I worked for 7 years in Washington, D.C. before I came here, I took a brief respite. I came back for a year, and I worked for a judge here on the Utah Supreme Court for a year. And the idea was, my wife and I talked about this, we had a baby at the time. We said, well, we'll give our parents a chance, to see their grandchild for a year, and then we will flee again. But this strange thing happened when we lived here for a year, which was that we figured out, sort of to our dismay, that Salt Lake is a really, really nice place to live. And so we kind of went back to DC with this idea in mind, if we ever do the academic thing, Salt Lake might be an interesting place to come back to. And the stars sort of aligned, and we ended up back here. And I can say that having been back here 8 years and being a native Utahn, I'm a very proud Utahn. Our school is a terrific place. The excellence of the students and my colleagues, the devotion to teaching I think that we all have is, really something that in some ways I think I actually missed in law school. I don't think I always got that. I think I had a fair number of professors who were too focused on research and not focused on what happened in the classroom. And I don't think you can say that about any of our professors here. I think all of our professors from, A to Z really, really care about the students. And that's a really, really important thing. It's something I think we cherish and value and hold as a very high value for our institution. Let me just say a little bit about the curriculum. Dean Adler mentioned that every student is guaranteed at least one small section that has about 20 students in it in their first year here. I'm working on the schedule right now, so I will guarantee you that if you come here, you'll have 2 at least, and maybe 3 of those, which I don't think a lot of other schools have. And as Dean Adler mentioned, a lot of our classes are generally small. Let me just say one other brief thing about our environmental and natural resources curriculum for those of you who are interested in that, because I teach in that area. We have a wide array of classes in that area, and not just in terms of breadth, but also in terms of depth. So just as an example, some of the classes we'll be offering next year, environmental law, energy law, oil and gas, air pollution, natural resources law, international environmental law, an environmental law clinic, a couple of different competitions, the environmental law competition, the energy law competition, environmental conflict resolution, and that's just 1 year. So we really do have a great depth of offerings. And I can say that about environmental law, but I can also say that about a bunch of other areas where we really are super strong. Civil rights, criminal law, litigation, business law, from top to bottom. One other thing I'll just say quickly about the curriculum, and I'll let Professor Cheng talk, is that one thing I think we are really good at, we've gotten even better, and I think we're going to get even better than we already are at the curriculum, is we really do, as Dean Adler mentioned, blend theory and practice here. So we have a number of offerings in terms of clinics. Pretty much any kind of clinical placement you might want to do while you're in law school, we can make possible and do right now. We also offer a number of courses in terms of skills that bring home sort of the possibility of you've now learned what that area of law is about, and now you can learn how to use those skills in the courtroom. So we have courses this summer, for instance, about how to take and defend depositions, how to prepare witnesses for cross-examination, how to use technology and discovery in the courtroom. And we're adding more of those courses all the time. So we're also trying a course out this summer to use immigration skills and how to prosecute and defend immigration cases. The curriculum committee is meeting right now about maybe adding a class for next year to do family law skills. So really from top to bottom, I think the thing that we're maybe the best at, and I would argue certainly one of the best in the country at, is really blending that ability to learn the law and the theory behind it, but also to learn the pragmatic part and the practical part you'll need when you practice.
Hi, so my name is Emily Chang. I am actually a native New Yorker, and like Lincoln, I never expected myself to end up in Utah. It's one of those weird quirks of life. But it's been fabulous. Aside from the shortage of proper pizza and bagels, I get along pretty well here.
Better Mexican food.
So, have you been to New York?
Many times, and there's much better Mexican food here. We can have a
Questionable,
discussion
yes.
afterwards.
To be continued. So I'll focus mostly on what I do with the clinical program because I think I'm the only clinician on this panel, and it gives you kind of an insight into the sorts of practical and I think really cool, exciting things that you guys can do once you get here. So I run a public policy clinic, but there are many, many other clinical offerings at the school, and I'll focus on mine just to kind of give you some insight into what's possible. So whatever your passions are, your energies, the things that made you want to go to law school in the first place, I think the great thing about this institution is you can find a place to kind of channel those energies, and chances are there's a faculty member who can help you and to kind of be socially productive in the way that you presumably wanted to be when you applied to law school. So the clinic right now is focused on the school-to-prison pipeline issue, which is the phenomenon by which students, primarily students of color, disabled students, male students, are increasingly funneled out of the educational system and into the criminal justice system, right, through measures like zero tolerance, overuse of school resource officers, referrals to law enforcement, that sort of thing. So some of the cool things that my students have done is they've personally lobbied senators and legislators, state representatives, to make improvements. They issued a report that was cited really widely in the local press, kind of documenting what's happening in Utah and analyzing the most recently available data from the Department of Education. They have put together a summit of the top 50 education policymakers in the state of Utah that will be convened in our new building, right, in October. And they literally, got on the phone from everyone from the school superintendent to every legislator who was on the education subcommittee for the state, to head of, the head of the teachers union is coming, the spokesperson for the Fraternal Order of Police will be there. And one of the really nice things about, I think, living and working here is if you have an interest in public policy, and I know Professor Roski will talk about this as well, or I assume he will, you can really have a voice, right? That when a law student here calls the Utah State Superintendent, he picks up the phone and he has a conversation and meets in person with you, right? Same goes for the state senators and the state representatives. And I think, if you live in most other states, like if you're in California or New York, good luck getting that to happen. Other cool things that students I have worked with have done. I had a student just this past week, present at a symposium that was convened at Arizona State University on American Indian education issues. She was invited to present because of her work through the clinic. She developed an interest in what was happening with American Indians in Utah, discovered that although they constitute only 1.3% of the population, the student population here, they are the single demographic that is most likely to be referred to law enforcement out of school, and they are the single demographic most likely to be arrested out of school. So she analyzed the data. The clinic is going to issue her report I think by the end of April, and she went out and presented on this issue. I think at many other, I dare say most law schools, if you were working on a research project of this nature with a professor, chances are the professor would go and present at the symposium. Here, I encourage my students to go do the presentations. I think that they are the ones who are doing the work, and they're the ones who should get credit for it. So she went and she presented on a panel where she was, of course, the only law student, but I was extremely proud of her. Another student of mine recently, she's in the process of publishing an article with the Utah Criminal Law Journal. Her article is on what's happening to disabled students in Utah. She had a personal interest in the issue before she came to school, discovered that I was also interested in this issue, and said, can I write a paper on this? And I said, sure, let's try to get it published, and we did. right? So these are, it's just a small glimpse into the types of opportunities that I think this place offers. And I really do think we're unique in being able to offer you these types of things. And part of that is our unique location, the size of the state, the kind of, sometimes it's called small lake city, right? That has its huge advantages. And a lot of it is the nature of this institution itself, the dedication that the faculty have, and I think our willingness and ability to really channel your energies and what drives you.
So my name's Carissa Hessick. I can't really tell you where I'm from. I was a military brat, so I got shifted around every couple of years growing up. I come from a long line of military veterans and public school teachers, and they were all shocked when I said I wanted to go to law school. I still regularly get email forwards with every lawyer joke imaginable. Also don't understand why people teach people in their 70s and 80s how to use email. Moving that aside, after law school, I went and I practiced in New York and DC. I worked with a couple of judges, and I worked as a litigation associate in a firm in New York doing civil litigation and white-collar crime. But I knew when I was a law student I wanted to go into law teaching. So in 2005, I took a teaching fellowship at Harvard Law School, which was designed to transition people from practice into teaching. And from there, I got a job, a tenure track teaching job at Arizona State University Law School. And I moved to Phoenix, and I taught there for 6 years. And while I was there, I heard that there was an opening in my field at the University of Utah, and I jumped all over it. I put in my application, and I was absolutely delighted when they decided to interview and then hire me. I'm happy to talk in Q&A what it is that made me so excited about coming to Utah, why I wanted to be here in particular. But let me just say a couple of words about how it is that I work with students here at the law school. So my area is criminal law and criminal sentencing. Every time that I work on a project, I usually have a student working with me as a research assistant. Students have sometimes taken that work and the work that they've done for me and turned it into their own research or their own papers or their own writing samples for employers. Most recently, I was working with 3 different students on a grant application that Professor Roskis and our colleague Professor Baradaran and I are working on. It's actually getting submitted tomorrow to the Department of Justice. We're looking for a $500,000 grant to study sexual assault case processing here in Utah. As some of you may know, sexual assault is an underreported crime nationally, and even when people do report that crime, the charges tend not to be referred from law enforcement to prosecutors, and prosecutors are much less likely to file charges in sexual assault cases than they are in any other violent crime cases. So it's an issue that we're looking to study. We're working with some partners across campus, and if we do get awarded the grant, part of the money that we've asked for will go to hire a series of law students to help us with, among other things, interviewing prosecutors across the state of Utah about case processing generally and then sexual assault cases more specifically. I mentioned this particular project because I think it's such a great example of why Utah is such an excellent law school to come to. It's an excellent law school to come to because when we started talking about putting in this grant application, one of the first things that we talked about is how can our students benefit from it? And the thought was, A, to try to hire them and get some tuition waivers for them. But then B, how can we make sure that students who have an interest in this area get a lot of practical exposure to these questions when they're in law school, but also have the opportunity to make connections with professionals in the field while they're still in law school. I think our school is especially dedicated to making sure that students get to do things that they're interested in while they're here, but to also make sure that students don't see being a law student as separate from practicing law or whatever unique way that you are going to go and use your law degree. So just another example of how we give our students an opportunity to meet people that will then maybe eventually give them a job, or if not give them a job, just give them more of an understanding and a better appreciation for what people do with their law degree. My sense is, from having spoken to the alumni in the few years since I've been here, is that our graduates are extremely happy with what they do. They're extremely happy with the education that they got here. And I think that if they could talk to you, they would tell you that you guys should totally come here.
Hi, I'm Cliff Roski, and I'm from a small town right next to Atlantic City, New Jersey, so I'm far away from home now. Just in terms of, we talked about the virtues of living in Salt Lake City, and I can tell you I've lived in New York City, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Seattle, and Boston, and honestly, in terms of a place to live, none of them hold a candle to this city, and that's one of the reasons I moved here. Obviously, this school is the other major reason, but I really think, and what I've noticed, I wasn't surprised when some of my students who grew up in Utah said, I have to, as soon as I get out of law school, I have to get a job somewhere else and leave. That's a natural instinct, right? What I was somewhat surprised by is within, I think, 2 or 3 years, all of them come back willingly, not because they didn't like it, but, and I would say, at first I would say why. The first student who left and came back was a rock climber, and she went to DC for 2 years, and then she came back here, and I said, what happened? And she said, do you know how far you have to drive to find a mountain out there? It was like, yes, I do, actually. So it's really, I think, unparalleled. Okay, so I teach, as the dean said, criminal law, constitutional law, and then a class called sexuality, gender, and law, which is not on the bar, but it's a really fun class. We talk about issues like same-sex marriage and anti-discrimination laws and lots of gay and transgender rights issues, but we also talk about the interaction between sexuality and law in general. So this week we're going to talk about pornography on Wednesday and polygamy on Thursday. I don't know if you've heard, there's a federal court order striking down Utah's polygamy law that is currently being appealed. So it's quite a hot topic. My scholarship is, the research that I do is mostly about these LGBT rights issues, same-sex marriage and anti-discrimination laws. And as the dean said, on the public service side, I've been the board chair of an organization called Equality Utah for the last several years, and they work to secure equal rights for LGBT Utahns and their families. And I want to tell you about a couple of the things I did and how they connect to my teaching here and how students have been involved in those. So I think it was December 20th, 2013, Utah sort of shocked the world. A federal judge struck down the state law against same-sex marriage here. And because of some lawyering error on the state side, same-sex couples were getting married right away. Normally it would take years until you go to the Supreme Court, and right away thousands of people were running down to the county clerk's office. And very quickly, Equality Utah got involved in the public education around that case, and also to some extent in the litigation. So I wrote an amicus brief to the 10th Circuit and also advised the lawyers in the district court. And throughout that process of advising and helping people practice oral arguments and then submitting a brief, I was drawing on students to help me with the research for this argument, that argument, and we were very much on the cutting edge. This was the first case after the Supreme Court struck down a federal ban on same-sex marriage. It was the first state ban to fall, and so. Making it up as we were going along is not exactly right, but like pushing the envelope on all of the legal arguments around same-sex marriage, which had already been litigated in about 40 cases. It's a really challenging, cutting-edge opportunity, not just to learn about same-sex marriage, but to learn about constitutional law, because that is one of the hot topics in constitutional law right now. All of the rules that you learn in con law are being stretched to their limit in those cases. And we submitted a brief in the 10th Circuit case. The appeal was successful. The Supreme Court declined the appeal, and that's how same-sex marriage came to Utah. And then the other thing that I've been doing for about the last 7 years is working with the legislature and also with the LDS Church to try to find a statewide anti-discrimination law that could get through our legislature, and we just succeeded in that effort this year. So it's a law that says that you can't discriminate based on sexual orientation or gender identity in employment or housing in Utah. Most people think that's already the law throughout the country, but it's not, actually. And that was a fascinating process. And this year, because there was so much activity in the news, both locally and nationally, around that effort, I incorporated it into my sexuality and gender class. So, for example, the second day of the legislative session, the LDS Church made an announcement that it would support anti-discrimination laws. It was a complicated, nuanced announcement. It was like a 20-minute press conference. It had a lot going on in there. They wanted to link anti-discrimination laws to religious liberties. And so the one thing I did that day, the next day I happened to be teaching my class. Many times in classes, most of what you do in law school is learn how to read judicial opinions. That is, the opinions that judges write when they're deciding cases. You also, to some extent, learn how to read statutes, but I think somewhat less often. But part of being a lawyer is being able to advocate on behalf of organizations, and sometimes you have to make sort of public statements in cases and things like this. And of course, many people in my class are interested in the kind of social justice advocacy angle. And so I divided the class into two groups. One said, let's pretend that you work for Equality Utah. And the other was, let's pretend you work for the Eagle Forum. I don't know if you know what the Eagle Forum is. It's essentially the opposite of Equality Utah. They advocate socially conservative values in Utah. And so we're going to, each of you, all of you, we're all going to read the church's statement together, and then you're going to spin it. You're going to craft talking points. And I said talking points, you have to appeal to your membership, but you also have to appeal to the middle of Utah. That is, whoever you imagine is persuadable on your issue. Everything you have to say, it has to be one sentence and a short sentence, and there can't be any legal terminology in it. This is a real challenge for law students. They started, using all the lingo that they learned in law school, and nobody would understand that if they weren't in law school. So that was and what was fun was I thought we were going to spend about 15 minutes on it, and the students wouldn't let us stop. For an hour and a half, they were totally riveted on this question of how do you craft talking points around a legal issue. And then, of course, when the bill actually was released, we analyzed the bill, and an hour and a half wasn't enough for that. It's a very complicated bill, and what they quickly realized now when reading the news is that nobody understands what that bill is, nationally, locally. People are just telling lies about what the bill does on both sides, and they are, one of the select groups that actually understands what the bill does. And again, throughout the legislative process, I was relying very heavily on students. Often, they were always optional, but they were urgent assignments. Can you tell me in the next 2 hours the answer to this question? And people were doing really great work to support us, so much appreciated.
Okay, so if there was one theme, I think, across the board, it was student opportunity, and so we're now going to give you an opportunity to ask us questions. So you can ask questions to the panel as a whole, to any individual, to me, whatever you'd like. And don't be shy, because law school is interactive. It's not just a lecture class. No one wants to be first. Who's going to be brave? Have we done such a good job? Yes,
start
thank
calling
you
on
very
you.
much. Thank you very much.
Talk a little bit, this is just for the panel in general, but can you just talk a little bit about summer opportunities and what the school does for students in the summer?
So, yeah, I guess to start with me maybe. So I think three things, right? So first of all, like a lot of schools, we have a great professional development office that tries really hard, and Jess Hosberger, who's the director of that office, is sitting in the back. So shout out to Jess.
Do that awkward arm thing again, Jess.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I'm glad that we characterized it as awkward. He does have bigger arms than I do, like these scrawny runner arms. So, the office helps folks try to get job placements that are paying jobs or sometimes in positions that don't pay, but might lead to a job down the road. So a lot of our students, especially students who finish their second year, do that. I think sort of nationally it's a little bit harder to do that in terms of coming out of your first year. Secondly, our clinical program has placements throughout the world, really. I just talked to a student a couple days ago who's going to South Africa for the summer. But throughout the world, throughout the nation, and also really heavily in Utah, if you want to have a placement, working for an environmental organization. I just talked to somebody who was doing work with Utah Clean Energy, or in a court. A lot of our students work in courts downtown, either in the state courts or the federal courts during the summer. So we have a lot of clinical placements. And I said 3, but actually I'll go with 4. Third, a fair number of our students will do research either part-time or full-time with professors during the summer. I have a number of students who do that with me every summer. And then fourth, we do have a summer program that offers courses. So some students do that because they want to make sure they get their residency before their second full year starts. Some students do it because they want to make their load lighter throughout their second and third years so they can take some summer courses and get things out of the way. And some people do it, just because they like some of the offerings. And those courses vary from year to year, but they're usually a really good mix of some basic doctrinal courses, like we're offering evidence, which is a pretty standard course people take in law school this summer, but we're also offering some of these skills kind of classes that are more narrow about immigration or trial techniques.
And let me add, I actually think another thing that Utah does really well is a lot of us spend a lot of time talking with our students about what it is that they want to do that summer, right? I mean, so the school does a great job having all of these opportunities for you, but at the end of the day, you're you, right? You're not anyone else. You're not the average law student. You're whoever you are with, whatever interests you already have, or maybe you haven't yet figured out what interests you. I mean, I feel like every time I walk by one of my colleagues' offices, we're usually in there talking to students, and oftentimes what we're talking to them about is, what should they do this summer? What should they think about doing this summer if, they have an interest in criminal law? Or if they don't know what they're interested in, right? Maybe they've knocked out something. Maybe they've knocked out real estate law. Maybe not, right? But we spend a lot of time talking to the students and saying, I could see 3 different things that you could do here to try to pursue that. Or here's this 4th thing. So it's not just that the school has these structures in place that allow you guys great summer opportunities. It's that on top of that, there's this real sort of one-on-one interaction to make sure that you're taking advantage of those opportunities in the way that's ultimately sort of most beneficial for you and most interesting for you.
Just a footnote to that. This is not about the summer per se, but just one of the things that I think is really great about our school is the kind of individual attention you can get, as Professor Hessick was noting. Just as an example, a couple of our students that I've been working with this year who wanted to get jobs working for judges out of law school, so we call these clerkships. One of them was when she was going back to interview for the Federal Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C., was texting me and calling me, and I was giving her advice sort of on the fly as she was going to these interviews. Another student just interviewed in the 10th Circuit in New Mexico with a federal judge, and so he sent me over the weekend his thank you notes, and I gave him comments on how he should write his thank you notes. That's the kind of individualized attention you can get at a school like ours. I think a real value.
Yeah, it's just, and sort of more generally, I went to a law school that was very small, good faculty-student ratio. Nonetheless, after 20 minutes in a professor's office, it was over. It was, that's just the way it was. You could just tell. It was over. I can't count the number of more than hour-long conversations I've had with students because I enjoy them. This is like one of my favorite parts of my job. So I think some of the best teaching and learning happens just one-on-one, and I think that's a real virtue of this place. I thought that the law school I went to was one of the smallest in terms of student bodies, and we're about half the size or something like that. It's incredible.
Did that answer your question? Was that responsive?
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious about the clinical programs. How does, is that something that we would kind of initiate with our professors, or how does that side work?
So yes and no. Yes, in that if you have a specific interest, you would go to the folks who direct the clinical program, so that's Professor Linda Smith and Kay Shelton, who assists her, and say, I have an interest in this area. But no, because we have a structure already in place that's been long-standing, and which is part of why Dean Adler mentioned, we were second only to Yale last year in terms of clinical opportunities for students. Pretty much anything that you might want to do a clinic in, we can make happen. I say that because I can't name off all the clinics we have because there are so many different kinds of placements. But I can pretty much guarantee you that if we walked you over to Professor Smith's office and said, I'm interested in immigration or I'm interested in family law, she would say, oh, we have these 8 different possibilities for that you could do a clinical placement in. She's worked really hard to have connections all across the valley in the state.
This, I think, is an important distinctive advantage of this place, is that there are 2 law schools in the state, only 2, right? And we're located in the state capital. These are huge advantages for networking and placement in terms of clinics. That is, principally when, the state of Utah, the government of Utah and its cities wants to hire lawyers, they're going to hire it from us and BYU, and that's that's a huge advantage. And it's also, I mean, I'm sure that that's also true in some other states where you don't want to live. So we actually have a great city here, beautiful, lots of great restaurants and other theater, whatever interests you. And yet, we also have that advantage of having only 2 law schools in the state. This is not, forgive me, because I'm from New Jersey, so I feel free to make jokes about other states, right? But this is not South Dakota, right? Like that, or North Dakota, or whatever. This is,
Way to go.
Sorry. I'm from New Jersey, so welcome to the. Sorry.
But to Professor Roski's point, I have friends who went to Stanford Law School or Chicago Law School and call me and say, can you get somebody X firm to look at my resume, because they won't look at me because I don't have Utah or BYU on my resume.
When you leave here and then come back, you have to sell them that you really want to come back. There is that part of this law firm network here, which is, now I think the degree does carry outside the state, but it is exceptionally valuable, and I think it's a competitive advantage in the state.
Yeah, I do want to say that we place graduates in every city around the country and internationally as well. And we've got a pretty robust network of alumni who are willing to help you in Las Vegas, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, most of the major cities where you might want to practice. I know there's this big push about how great Salt Lake City is to live, and I agree. I've been here 21 years. And raised my family here, but some of you might want to go elsewhere. And we are a national law school. We are not just a state or a regional law school from a placement perspective.
And also from the faculty, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Lincoln's the only person from Utah on this panel, and that's not unusual.
So second should be easier, right, having broken ground. Other questions? Well, so I'm going to ask a question, and maybe that will prompt some for you. Could each of the panelists perhaps say a little bit more about your teaching philosophy and approach? Socratic method versus interactive versus problem solving, a little bit about the range of teaching methodologies you use?
So I would say my philosophy is sort of modified Socratic. So I'll ask a lot of questions, and I expect students to know the material that we read. But I practiced for 7 years. I had friends ask me, why are you practicing if you want to teach? And I said, I think I should probably know how to be a lawyer if I'm going to teach people how to be a lawyer. I mean, just, odd, but, sort of common sense from my perspective. So I'll ask a lot of questions, but I'll also usually lecture for part of my class, so I make sure all the students are sort of on the same page. And then we work through a lot of exercises. I mean, I think, I'll let each of my colleagues talk about what they do specifically, but I think one thing that is sort of this really interesting trend in our school is that the classroom really is interactive, right? So one thing I have my students do in civil procedure, which is a first-year course about sort of, the rules of litigation, I have them write a complaint, which is sort of 2 or 3 weeks into law school, which is the first thing you file in a case. But I have them write a complaint for an actual case. It's this crazy case involving a cat who bit someone, and then the lady sued the owner of the cat. I like cats. My cat's crazy. She is.
I know your cat, Lincoln.
I know. My cat's so crazy that Professor Hesseck's husband showed the picture of my cat to his daughter, and she calls it the scary cat. But the point is, I have them write a document that you would file in a lawsuit, and we put some up on the board, and then we have them write the next document that follows that, and then I have them come up in groups, and they work on the discovery that you would do to try to get information out of the other side, and we use this as an example throughout the semester, sort of, how would you do this thing in in real life as we're talking about different devices in the court. And so I'm trying to get students to apply what we're learning on a regular, consistent basis. And I think other people do that too. I mean, Professor Roski probably mentioned he usually does a trial in his criminal law class. Professor Teeter, who Dean Adler mentioned, won an early career teaching award. has this series of problems where he pulls the briefs from cases and have students analyze which way arguments were made and what the court did with those arguments and really get beneath the decision that the court issued. I think you'll see that across a lot of our faculty. So I don't know that my philosophy is that much different, but I think maybe it's emblematic in the way that I really try to blend sort of traditional teaching methods with cutting edge methods of getting students to really apply and understand what we're doing.
So I do think that one other thing that sets the faculty here apart from the faculty at many other law schools, including where I went to law school, is the vast majority of the faculty here have spent some meaningful amount of time practicing law. And I think that really makes a difference, right? Because you all presumably want to go out and practice law and be actual lawyers. So I was a civil rights lawyer for a number of years, and I loved it. I thought it was fabulous. It was super, super fun. And my goal in all of my classes is to prepare you guys for practice. So when I teach constitutional law, which is kind of a larger class, I intentionally, it's cold call, which sounds terrible, right? Like I give you no warning and your name could be called at any moment and you're not allowed to pass or to say, oh, I don't know. Because I tell my students, look, in real life, you don't get to show up to court and be unprepared in the hopes that, well, maybe I won't be called on today, right? But the flip side of that is, I believe in open book exams where you have a lot of time. Because I also think that in real life, you have access to all of the materials that you might need, right? That you get to Google stuff in real life and you get to take your time to really write your brief and edit it down and kind of craft it and make it the best document you can. So I do that in my larger classes. In the clinical setting, again, so one interesting thing about our clinical program is some of the clinics are externships where you go into someone else's office and you're there working for the judge, or you're there at legal aid, you're there working for legal defenders or prosecutor's office. Other clinics, you're working with a professor on projects, right? So that's my type of clinic. It's more of an in-house sort of thing. And there, I really try to cultivate the sorts of skills that I think you guys need to be good legal professionals, and that includes being good colleagues, right? So we workshop drafts, where a lot of times I say hardly anything if a class is going well, right? A student says, well, here's the press release that I crafted, and we literally go around the room, we roundtable it, right? Because this is what happens in real life. When you're workshopping a document, you show up, and to be a good professional colleague, you should have read your colleague's work. And then you have thoughts about it, and you learn to both deliver criticism in a really nice and thoughtful, helpful way. And the flip side of that is you learn to take criticism that's intended to be helpful, right? And I encourage my students, or they're forced more or less, to work in teams, because I also think that that's how legal work gets done these days. Even if you're in solo practice, you're working with other people, right? Whether it's opposing counsel, your legal assistant, you're working in cooperation with someone else across town on a particular case, whatever it is. So in the seminar setting, I also teach a seminar on race, equality, and the law. There, again, I try to make sure that it's kind of reflects what people would actually do in the scholarship world, right? That you're engaging with the scholarship, that you're producing your own. Students are reading one another's drafts. I have the students give, and I think this is pretty standard in seminars, you'll give like a 15 to 20 minute presentation on your topic. But the other thing that I do is I have you sit down afterwards and talk about, well, what do you think went well and what do you think went less well? And then we go around the room and everyone else in the room, because it's a safe space, says, hey, I thought you did awesome on this thing, but here's one thing that maybe you could work on, right? Both substantively and in terms of how the presentation went. So throughout it all, the idea is, I practiced law for a long time. I really want you guys to be happy, productive lawyers. And I guess the other thing that I do is really encouraging folks to think proactively about career management, how to make sure that you're happy lawyers, because I think it's never too early to start to get into the habits that make people, really enjoy their professional lives, because I think that's really critical.
So I'll be a brief. I use a lot of different methods. I think we all do. I think that's something that you're already seeing and would see if you went around the whole faculty. So just some so a little bit of lecture, a little bit of cold calling, all that kind of stuff. I recently, as the dean said, one of our colleagues won this early career teaching award, which is a university-wide award. It's a really big deal. People get very excited about his teaching, and so I just talked to him before this semester. I said, "Michael, what do you do in there? What's the, and he gave me
Just handing out cookies.
Yeah, I mean, I was like very, he has more hair than I do, whatever, like there's lots of, possibilities here. And so, but I really sort of grilled him on it. His first answer was not satisfactory, and I really wanted to know because I care a lot about it. And I realized that I think one of the challenges with legal academia is we know what it takes to be a good lawyer, and everything we do in the classroom is teaching you that, but sometimes that's not obvious. Right, so you just think we're torturing you by asking you hard questions, and then harder questions, and then even harder questions, and what's the point of this? And what I think Michael does really well is the value, the value to you of the questions and the exercises is always transparent. So he's like, okay, you graduate from law school, and now you work for the Utah Attorney General's office, and you have to defend this law in court. The plaintiff says this, what do you say, right? So it's very clear, and so I'm doing a lot more of that this year, and it's interesting to see everyone's eyes light up, right? Even if they're not answering the question themselves, everyone understands why I need. This could be me next year or in 2 years. The other thing that I've done distinctively, and I particularly in my first year criminal law class, is working one-on-one with students on their writing, in particular practice exams. What I found, and I'm sure many people have, is that most of you learn the law. You want to learn the law, you come to class, you do the reading, you listen, take good notes, and you've learned the law. But when you get asked an exam question and you write down the answer, you don't have a clear idea of what it is that you're trying to do in that exercise, writing the exam answer. And so that's a real missed opportunity. And I hit critical mass last year in my 1L class. People, I would say you could do a practice exam and then come in, and one person would come in, another would come in, and then I really just pushed it hard, and I got about 10 people, and then I finally just said, we're on a curve, and 10 of you have come in. And then all of a sudden, everyone was in my office, and it was fantastic because everyone learned. Now, I don't force you to come in because I don't want that kind of relationship about that. If you don't want to do that, that's just fine. But, and I would do it as many times as you would revise. We would do one answer. We wouldn't do 10 different answers, but one answer. I would revise it. I would help you revise it. You'd do it again, do it again, do it again until it was perfect. And the difference in the exams was it was incredible. The entire class just sort of moved up in their writing ability in in a few months. And I know that that's something that I've picked up from my colleagues, for sure. I know Lincoln does that, and Michael does that.
So let me just say, I mentioned before, right, descended from military veterans and public school teachers. And so when we get together at Thanksgiving and my family, aside from me explaining to them that their lawyer jokes aren't actually that funny, we spend a lot of time talking about teaching, right? So lawyers, they don't send us, to go get a master's in education before they send us into the classroom, right? We get these jobs because we publish good research or, because we had fancy clerkship for judges or something like that. And I think at a lot of schools, you can see in the classroom that people didn't get their jobs because they were going to be good teachers. And as I said, I very specifically came to Utah after 6 years at another institution, and I came here because I cared about the teaching, right? So in order to win those arguments at Thanksgiving, I would go and I would read educational theory and about pedagogy and about the latest studies. I really like to win arguments. But when I would talk to my other colleagues not here about what insights I was getting from that literature, about how I was trying to change my teaching, they weren't interested in having those conversations. And it's not surprising, right? I go to these national conferences. Most people at those conferences, most law professors at those conferences aren't interested in having those conversations. We have those conversations here at the U every day, right? So maybe the other people haven't read John Hattie's meta-studies on pedagogical theory. But you'd think that they would because of the way that they change their teaching and the way that they speak to each other and the different methods that they use for the different types of people who respond to different learning styles. So I cared very much about teaching, and I wanted to be at a faculty who did the same, right? At a faculty that wasn't increasing class size in order to get more tuition dollars at a time when the legal employment market probably wouldn't bear it. But instead, at a school that very deliberately keeps its faculty-student ratio extremely beneficial towards students, at a faculty where, I go to leave my office and the person across the hall from me, who was there before I came in and is there after I'm leaving, is working on her slides from class because she met with somebody in the educational psychology department to talk about better ways to convey information to her students. So what I'm trying to say to you is this is a school that not just as a matter of practice, but as a matter of custom and as a matter of culture, cares very much about its students and very much about its teaching. I've never seen people who spent so many hours trying to make sure that the next time that they teach that class, that they teach it even better, or the next time that they give an exam, they get even better answers from their students. That's something that, at the end of the day, I get up every morning and I come in sometimes wearing a suit to teach a class, and sometimes wearing jeans to do research or to prep for another class. I care about that classroom experience really deeply. It's why I wanted to be here. And I get it, you guys have a lot of different things to think about, but I think at the end of the day, you're gonna spend 3 years, a lot of that's in the classroom, and I'd hope that you would think that you wanna be at a place where everyone in the classroom, including the person at the front, desperately wants to be there and desperately wants to make it the best experience possible.
Yes.
So, this is the first time I've ever considered this, but I think after listening to you guys, I may want to end up in a teaching position somewhere, which brings a whole new level of what to look for in pursuing my law career. And so my question, I guess, is primarily for the dean, who I'm assuming is heavily involved in hiring professors. What type of things should I be looking for in a law school that might prepare me to be able to obtain a teaching position someday?
So my first comment is, look how inspiring our faculty is. They've already inspired one of you to obtain a different career aspiration. The single most important thing in getting a law teaching job is doing well in law school. Grades are important. Developing a research portfolio, so writing, getting published. I agree very much with what Dean Davies said, and I think Professor Chang said as well. You're a better teacher if you've practiced. With due respect to some who haven't, but I think.
We all practice.
We've all practiced.
Okay. So I practiced for 15 years.
I just look very young.
I practiced for 15 years before I went into law teaching. I think a balance in a faculty between different types of practice is very good for our students. We have placed a number of law faculties from this school. So it's really what you make of the opportunity. To be quite honest, if you look at law faculties around the country, there's a predominance from Harvard, Yale, Stanford, other Ivy League schools, but there are a lot of law faculty around the country from Utah and other schools like it.
Let me just add a footnote. So that's true about the elite schools, and I think all of us sitting here went to an elite school. But I'll also say there are really obvious examples of people from our school who've gotten really great teaching jobs. Professor Leslie Francis went here. Professor Chris Peterson went here. He wrote a book in his third year of law school and had the support from our school to do that. And I've had some students recently talk about wanting to teach in academia coming out of our law school. And I think one thing that we provide, and I've done this with some students, is really great mentorship in terms of what your scholarship might look like, because that's really the coin of the realm when you go out to get a teaching job is, can you publish? Do you have a scholarly agenda? And we've had a lot of students in their third year, maybe some even in their second year, placing articles and getting them published from here, and that's something that I think I didn't really get that support from my elite school in terms of trying to get a job.
It is very rare for a law student to get an article published in an outside law journal, not your home school law journal. We've got 3 to 6 a year, I'd say, around the country, which is pretty unique, unusual. Yes, sir.
My name
is Jorge Pasos. I come originally from Lima, Peru, and actually probably my question is not too important for many of my friends are here, but I had the opportunity to learn the law actually in Peru. You know, the difference between the common law and the Roman civil law is totally different. So I want to know who will be the person to talk. Like, I need some advice on how to approach this, right? This new venture, because I already learned the law in basically looking at the statutes and the codes right there, and I know that law school here is totally different. So I don't know if one of you will be able to talk to me later, or will be some other professor. You know, basically my question is, should I just learn what I learned, or not? Right?
No. Never dislearn something that you've learned, because comparison is really important. You know, this distinction between civil law and common law is not as cut and dried as you might think. And a lot of law in the United States is statutory, and reading statutory texts and interpreting statutory texts is really important. So do not lose your civil law background. We've got a very strong faculty in international law, comparative law. So Professor Erica George, Professor Tony Angi, who is visiting at the National University of Singapore this year, but will be back next year. Professor Shibli Malat, who's an expert in Middle Eastern law and European Union law, knows a lot about these distinctions. Professor Amos Giora, who does a lot of work on international terrorism law. We've got a lot of experts to help you in that area. Other comments from the panel on that? Yes.
In learning about some of your individual teaching philosophies, some of you mentioned encouraging a collaborative approach amongst the students, and I was curious if that was something that you feel is encouraged across the entire student body, or I asked because I've been a couple schools where it was so competitive and cutthroat that I was surprised they were able to get anything done, because, you know, stealing case notes and not answering, not helping any of the other students in order to keep, you know, their rankings and scholarships and whatnot available to them. So,
Are you from Utah, or where are you from?
I'm from Seattle.
This is one of the distinctive things about Utah, and people who are from here will know this, is there's like a Utah nice that is pervasive here.
It's better than Southern nice.
Yeah, oh, it's
Utah nice, Utah
that
nice
is
nicer.
Utah Nice is genuine.
Yeah, no, it's. I can think of. I've been here teaching here 7 years. I can think of one student who had a reputation for sort of being sharply competitive, and you know that was a problem for that student to have that reputation here. I don't think that that's. I mean, it's, you know, people are all doing their best. There's a difference between doing your best and trying to steal. There's none of that. There's none of that here. Yes, collaboration, I think, is a very hot trend. I do, and again, we take pedagogy lessons from places like, you know, grade school, right? That's what people think hard about pedagogy when they have like toddlers and stuff. And so one of the things I do is pair and share in the classroom, and I tell which is you ask a question and you have to talk to your neighbor about it, and then after that, one of you can speak in class and say, you know, some of you don't like speaking in class and would rather talk to your neighbor, and this is for you. But then there are others of you who don't like to collaborate, and this is for you too, because lawyers collaborate, whether you like it or not. This is part of life, and so that's part of the lesson is, and I get, you know, complaints from the people who don't like to collaborate, and I don't care. I'm teaching them a skill that they need to learn, because most people, even solo practitioners, have to collaborate. It's really important. And I think also the fact that even though we do international placements and we do national placements, we are a national law school, the fact that a significant number of people will stay here and practice here is an important socializing effect. You can't just sort of steal case notes, because you will not then get referrals in your practice when you go out into the world.
Yeah, so I should say that so many of us, right, we come to this trying to make sure that you guys have the skills that we thought were necessary when we went out as young lawyers, right? I was shocked when I started practicing how much group work that I ended up doing at my law firm, right? We'd break out into teams all the time. Assignments would be given to more than one person. And I think it's because of experiences like that that so many of us have these lots of different ways of giving assignments and lots of different ways of and skills that we want you guys to learn. Collaboration is a big one, but professionalism is another really, really big one, because I understand what you're saying about that sort of culture, and I think that there are some law schools out there that have a reputation of encouraging those sorts of cultures. Let me give you a non-law school example. So my older sister went to Hopkins, Johns Hopkins, and people would steal pages out of books in the libraries. If someone thought they were going to do poorly on their exam, they'd pull the fire alarm in the dorm the night before so that no one got a good night's sleep. There are some schools at which those things are legends, right? That's sort of, it's not maybe an embraced part of the culture, but it's part of the culture nonetheless. But schools have cultures, and that is very much outside of the culture here, very much outside of. And I think because of that, law school is less stressful for our students, right? Law school is always going to be kind of stressful, right? Just like everything that you want to do well at is going to be kind of stressful. But I think we do a good job eliminating that sort of really unnecessary stress and behavior that at the end of the day would serve you very poorly as a lawyer. Even at sort of the cutthroat New York firms that Professor Chang and I practiced at, like, you can't be that person and succeed, and we want to make sure that everyone succeeds. So if anyone started down that path, we would very much tell them to stop. One, because we love the culture, but two, because that would be really bad for you as a practicing attorney.
I just want the record to show that I went to Johns Hopkins, and I don't remember any of that kind of behavior, but that was a long, long time ago.
The record
so maybe
shows
things,
no, yeah.
maybe that has changed. The curriculum also reflects that approach to collaboration. We've got a pretty strong program in alternative dispute resolution. Conflict resolution talks about collaborative law, which is a new philosophy of how you practice, particularly in the area of family law and other areas. So that is part of our curriculum as well as part of our culture and philosophy.
If I could just add one other brief thing. I mean, so not only is it sort of outside the culture of Utah as a state to be competitive like that in a bad way, and outside the culture of our school, not that I like to compete, I like to win. You can ask Dean Adler, I like to win.
Yes, he does.
But competitive in a negative way. But I think, our institution tries to build a kind of culture that already exists in our school, but to underscore it and to feed it. That really does create a culture of collaboration among the students. So you'll see things like students working on Supreme Court briefs with Paul Cassell, or students co-authoring articles with students. I've done this a couple times now. Or like in the first year, we have these small sections for our students, and they get together with the professor at their house or at a park and have a party, and you see this kind of culture among our students. All my students that were in my Civ Pro class last year came into class one day because they'd all said, we survived Tommy Torts, which is one of our torts professors, and they had all gotten a mug that they decided to chip in and do together. That's the kind of culture we have here.
There was another question.
Yes.
Speaking to that, then, what kind of grading strategies then? Are we graded on the curve quite a bit, or is it just kind of, you're laughing, that's scary.
I think we're all looking at
Laughing
Professor
because
Hessig,
we're all
she's been
talking
working on
about this among the faculty,
Yeah.
but
I think Professor Hessig should take this.
okay.
So the school's in the middle of revisiting its grading policy, and how the grading policy affects the students and affects the culture is actually, I think, the first issue that's been mentioned in the grading policy memo that's been going around to the faculty. We don't right now have a curve. We have an average, a range of a GPA average that faculty have to achieve in all classes above a certain number of students. We're actually revisiting the policy because after years of doing that, we're actually not sure that that's the policy that makes the most sense for our students and that our students would appreciate the most. And I'll say one thing that I would be very interested if you guys are visiting other schools that do this. But every time we go to change a policy here at the U, we bring it before something called College Council. It's the relevant governing body here at the law school. And that is not just made up of faculty members. There's student representatives in that body. So before we make any changes to the grading policy, it's going to be something that's vetted before our student reps, something that they'll speak about, something to make sure that there's student input in making that decision. And then the students will be voting on it too. So right now, I actually think that we do have a policy that's not, it's not
mandatory.
It's a mandatory mean, right? Which is if you add everything up and then divide it by the number of students, that's how you get the mean. As opposed to, we can talk other math, medians, distributional curves. So I think that the policy that we have now doesn't sort of as a structural matter result in that sort of cutthroat approach because it's not set how many grades a particular professor will give. But that being said, even if we were to move to another policy, I think we'd do it very deliberately in a way to make sure that we preserve that sort of collaborative, not that it's not a competitive school, right? Our students are competing, but I think oftentimes they're competing against themselves, right? They're pushing themselves to do well, not pushing themselves to make ever make anyone else look bad or anything like that. So I don't think that we have a grading policy right now that structurally reinforces that sort of overly competitive behavior. And if we make any changes, we'll certainly be very careful to preserve that feature. It's something that we've already been talking about.
I'll also just say, so we were all chuckling because a series of emails have been circulating amongst the faculty where people are weighing in on their opinions on whether changes should be made and what those changes should be. And I think pretty much every single email has focused on what does this mean for our students in terms of employment, their mental and emotional well-being. It's all designed around, how do we improve the quality of grading and the overall experience for students.
We have a former colleague, the late Professor John Flynn, who used to say, I teach for free. They pay me to grade. Because grading is the hardest part of the job in terms of the student experience. We love to teach. We have to grade. We want to try to do it fairly.
I think he also said, and they don't pay me enough to grade.
There was another hand up. Yes.
Yes. So do you guys grade all 3 years? And in this discussion of revising it, is there consideration of pass-fail for second and third year?
So I don't think we've talked about pass-fail for second and third year generally. All 3 years are graded. What we have been talking about is whether different kinds of courses should have different grading mechanisms. So I mentioned some of these skills classes that we have. Those we've talked about maybe not having graded or having graded in a different way, like on a median, so it's really flexible. A lot of the clinical, so we do also have things that aren't graded, right? So all of our clinical placements are typically pass-fail, so those don't, it's just, do you do the work and do you do it well enough? But I don't think we've talked about the second and third year being pass-fail.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason that we haven't done that is that some of us, so Professor Roski and I, we went to a school that didn't have grades, right? And I was like, oh, that's the best thing ever, right? I'll go to law school, I won't have grades, I'll just be able to focus on learning, I won't have to worry about, it actually doesn't work out like that. And then all of a sudden, what you're competing for is time with the professor after class in the front of the room to make sure that you can get a good recommendation letter. So when I was in your position, I thought pass-fail law school was going to make my law school career less stressful, and I actually, at the end of the day, I think it made it more stressful because all of a sudden, instead of just trying to do well at my schoolwork, I had to do all sorts of other things to try to distinguish myself, and I didn't even know what those things were.
And schools like that don't actually have real pass-fail, right? They have like fail, pass, high pass, so then everyone's going for the high pass, right?
That's right. It's called honors, but yes.
Yeah, it's sort of not great.
We do have a pass-fail policy where you can take one course, I think,
Right.
upper division. So if you really think you need to take income tax, but you're scared to death of it, you can do that.
And honestly, one of the things we're thinking about in changing the grading policy is, trying to, if we were to be able to make grading more consistent across classes, that frees you up to actually just study the things that you want to learn, as opposed to this sort of strategic decision-making about, I don't want to take that class because it's hard, I have to take that class because it's easy, even though I don't care about the subject. That's not very productive, right, for your educational experience. So
I think we have time for one more question in this session. Again, let me remind you that if you have more call, email, we'll answer your questions any way we can. Yes?
This is just kind of a general question for everybody, but I was wondering what your best advice is for those of us starting the first year of law school, whether it's study habits or whatever.
So I'd say 2 or 3 things. One is remember who you are when you get here, and stay that person. Stick to your dreams, to your goals, whatever they are. Second, be willing to be flexible and to learn other areas that maybe you weren't interested in, because you might get here and be like, oh, I really do want to be a tax lawyer, even though I thought I wanted to practice family law, or the other way around. And then third, I would say, also be flexible in terms of how you're learning, because law school is a little bit different than other disciplines. And we have an intro week that we do that tries to get everyone on the same level playing field and introduces everyone to the law, so you have a sort of sense of this. But a lot of what you do in law school is not really learn knowledge as much as it is learn how to think and how to strategize and how to advocate. And so if you come in like I did, I went to law school thinking, oh, I had my science degree, I learned all about ecology. Now I'm going to go learn all about the law. That doesn't work very well. What you need to learn is a lot about the law, but also a lot about how to think about the law.
I would say try to enjoy it. I think that for a lot of people, the first year of law school can be this just kind of stressful, anxious time. But to kind of put it into perspective, it's probably the last time you're going to be in school for a very, very long time, possibly forever. And school is this wonderful time where you get to learn about stuff and you can take naps, right? Like, it's really hard to nap after you graduate from school. I still manage to pull it off occasionally, but enjoy it, take classes that interest you. I mean, obviously in your first year, there's less parameters to do that, but have fun, maintain your work-life balance, continue to go rock climbing and skiing and see your friends and your family. Don't let it all just kind of drop away, and get to know your fellow classmates, hang out with each other, go out to bar review. These are the people who are gonna be your safety net for the next 3 years, right? If you have something really bothering you your 2L or 3L year, you're gonna be really glad that you made some good friends your 1L year who you can call up on the phone and say wow, I'm really stressed out, right? Let's go out and talk about this. And so, try to, as serious as it is, right? It's this huge investment. Loosen up, it's school, it's still good, it's fun. And if we're doing our jobs right, classes should be enjoyable too.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that Professor Davies and Professor Chang said. I'm going to say something that might sound contradictory, but I don't think it is. And I think it's allow your inner dork to shine, right? The one thing that you guys all have in common with each other is that you're exceptionally, exceptionally bright people who are looking to get a graduate degree. And the way that you may actually end up bonding with each other is because there's something about that case in contracts that you guys went over that's still really bothering you, or that you read some notes in the casebook that you thought was fascinating and you remind you of something that you saw on the news. It's funny because I think most of the time, sort of in life, when we go out to make friends, you don't indulge your inner dork, but this is the time where it actually what can bond you together and make some fantastic lifelong friends. I should add, I met my husband in law school in a conversation where he said the Constitution doesn't allow you to do this, and I countered with, but it does. He was right. I don't say that often.
Wow.
Doesn't happen that often. But it was only because I was fighting with some other dorky kid that I'm married and super happy. He does. He's a dork.
So what I would say is, I think bonding is an important part of the experience, and so bond if you want to bond, but don't rely on each other for advice. This is a real common phenomenon that, it's sort of during puberty, you're all, grade school kids are learning about sex and they're all asking each other, and we all now know that was probably the wrong source, right? And so, so if you want to know how to succeed in law school, do what you just did, which is ask folks who have succeeded in law school, who are lawyers, who are law professors, people who have done this already. It's natural that you'll turn to each other. Just to put a message in a bottle to yourselves. When it's tough, when you don't know what to do, ask someone who's not a law student for a perspective. It's really truly helpful because, it's just like rumors circulate. I still remember some of the advice I got from my classmates toward the end of my first year of law school. And it was just bizarre, the things that we would tell each other. And they became like what you had to do in law school. And it's just not. It's not true. You can make this your own experience, and talking to people who've been through it, we can help you do that.
Okay, it's time for your break. Please help me to thank our faculty panel. You have.
Thank you, guys. So we do have a 10-minute break. We'll meet here at 1:45 for the mock class taught by Amy Wildermuth. If you forgot your materials, we have some on that check-in desk, but you still want some of the cases that are going to be covered. We'll see you in about 10 minutes. Here's some water and what have you.